Hi, everybody. Got a really important topic to talk about today. So, if you're a college student, you definitely want to listen to this. If you're a parent, you most definitely want to listen to this. If you're an advocate or an activist, stay tuned. Returning to college campuses this fall will undoubtedly look unfamiliar for many college students and for students who are specifically survivors of sexual assault. Navigating resources and reporting may be even more challenging due to COVID-19 and other reasons as well from what we're going to talk about today. This month, the Trump administration and Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos implemented new federal regulations for colleges and universities when it comes to reporting sexual assault on campus. Students' safety and success is the center at everything that we do as a nation, right? And so we need to ensure that students are able to learn in safe virtual environments now given COVID, and that they feel supported by their university if something were to happen. So today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Caroline and Davey, who are advocates for sexual violence prevention and are currently raising awareness of allegations of sexual violence at the University of San Francisco. So welcome, guys, to the State of Blossoming.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. I'm Davy Jags on social media. I'm an entrepreneur, writer, and activist, specifically in sexual violence prevention work, but specializing in Title IX. So I to raise awareness to Title IX, specifically now that the Department of Education under Betsy DeVos has changed the regulations to bolster the rights of the accused.
Awesome. And I'm Caroline Christ, and I reside in Los Angeles. I am also an activist, entrepreneur, and an advocate for sexual violence prevention, among many other social justice causes that are really passionate to me. And I work in social services, so I work with folks with developmental disabilities, and so that's another lens that I like to bring into the work that I do. Voices of survivors that we don't always hear from. And I'm really excited to be here and to talk about Title IX and to talk about sexual violence and ways that folks can also take action on this, right? So thank you so much for having us.
Of course. Thank you guys for the introduction. There are a lot of changes. There's a lot of things happening between Black Lives Matter movement, COVID-19, and now most recently, these regulations just got passed, federal regulations that just got passed August 13th, August 14th, like last week, basically, right? And so a lot of people who are tuning in may not even know what Title IX is. And I think that's really important for us to dive into, like, what is Title IX and why is this important for our listeners to know about?
Yeah, so Title IX, you typically hear, at least when I was growing up and specifically being recruited as a student athlete, I always thought, okay, it's the equal number of female sports and male sports. And that is true, but what it actually is, it's making sure that everyone and fair education from discrimination on the basis of sex. And so that includes gender-based violence issues, which is considered an umbrella term for sexual assault, harassment, intimate partner violence. And what people don't necessarily grow up learning, students specifically don't grow up learning, it's your federal student rights that are in place to make sure that you are getting the education fairly, you're getting it safely, and it's not the criminal justice system, right? You're not when you're making a Title IX report, really you're reporting it so that the perpetrator may be expelled and that you might feel safer on campus. So no one is being arrested or anything like that. Also, it's just to ensure that you can get through your schooling and get your degree. Having mental health services, having accommodations between professors and your assignments. So it's there for students, and basically if schools, including K through 12 and universities, violate this federal right, they can be stripped from federal funding. This includes private schooling because every school still receives some federal funding. So it's to ensure that safety for the student.
And so that's very important because college students need to know what their rights are, right? And so how do these new rules under the Trump administration, right, change from the previous rules that were under the Obama administration?
That is a big question that I'm so glad you asked. So, looking at the Obama era of, the Dear Colleague letter in 2011, there really was this awareness of sexual violence being an epidemic on campus during that time, right? And you had the It's On Us campaign started, working in sexual violence prevention and really making this a priority during that time. Of course, as the administration changed and we have new leadership like Betsy, she's been basically systematically dismantling these policies that were in place since 2017, right? And so Davey and I have actually been looking at for, the past month, looking at cases that we've seen come through and comparing the current regulations in the final rule with the prior regulations. And across the board, what we found is that schools' responsibility is so much less than it was before, right? So their commitment to a fair process for survivors, not perpetrators, that responsibility is just not as strong, right? And there's not a law that is tying them to certain timelines and to certain policies, right? So schools basically have less work that they need to do because these policies are not as stringent. And we've seen in the past time frame too that sexual violence was still happening at super high rates even with stronger policies. So our concern is that by kind of lessening the burden of responsibility for schools, what does that mean for survivors, right? And so when we're looking at this, we really do see that these new regulations impact survivors in a very negative way and really do favor perpetrators. And we've been doing a lot of current work with my alma mater, which is the University of San Francisco, and it's a Jesuit institution in San Francisco. And there's been a lot of allegations of sexual violence that have come about in the last month. And so we've really been looking at the context of a major school having a bunch of allegations come out and this new rule kind of following shortly after about the same time. So it's been a very interesting context to do this work in and think about survivors and engage survivors as they're coming forward with these new rules that just went into effect last Friday.
And I think what's been interesting, well, for background, I did not go to USF, University of San Francisco. I actually graduated from Xavier University in Cincinnati, which is also a Jesuit university. I got involved with Title IX education from my own experience, but when I was able to see kind of the outbreak of these survivor stories on social media through, mutual followers, I picked up within seconds violations that were under the Obama administration's Title IX. And obviously I knew that this new regulation was going into place and, I couldn't just ignore it. And there's still something to be said fact that the university was sweeping cases under the rug for even when the Title IX ruling became better for survivors. And I think if you'll talk to any good Title IX coordinator, they want to see an increase of reports. They don't want there not to be reports because we're not, as advocates and activists, as much as we would love to stop sexual violence, bad people do bad things. And reporting is just holding these schools accountable and making sure these perpetrators are not harming anyone else and continuing to harm those victims that are coming forward. And I think that's what's been so upsetting with USF specifically is we are seeing perpetrators being found guilty and not being removed of campus. And I think that's where we have Caroline and I have accidentally been, this last month, compile this information and see where it's hitting, on the nation level, but like also national level, but also like just at University of San Francisco, and
Yeah.
going forward.
I'm interested, because I'm based in Washington, D.C. And so I am interested to know, the recent cases that you guys have been investigating and what that looks like in terms of reporting and how often someone is reporting. And I ask that because, Chanel Miller's case of her being sexually assaulted on Stanford's campus and the outrage of her perpetrator only serving 3 months, right? And so that case is a clear example of cases of sexual assault, and the judicial system not being equipped to find the truth, right, of what is behind a survivor's testimony. And so, given what happens in the judicial system and the interrogation of the victim and really going after that person's character and undermining who they are and their self-esteem and their self-worth and their confidence. And so under these new rules of Title IX, I also want to go into first, before I see this, what are the new Title IX rules? And under these rules, right, how would a case like that play out now? Are off-campus parties and things like that something to take into account?
Yeah, so I think an important distinction from Chanel Miller's case and what we are seeing at University of San Francisco is Chanel Miller's case went through the criminal justice system. She was not a student at Stanford, so she did have to go through the criminal justice system, which is brutal. Like it's brutal, and how that case played out is tragic and unfortunate. But that's also not to invalidate any of the survivors that have come forward at University of San Francisco. I don't think, with Caroline's background and certification and mine, I don't think either of us were ready to hear the poor survivor stories that we did, given all of these survivors went to the school for help. They had confidence in the school that they would help them. They attend this university. They have relationships with the professors. They look up to this administration. And I think, just from, not even being a student, which Caroline can speak to this better than I can, the trust with the school has been diminishing year by year by year. Their reputation of, going and trying to take these crimes seriously is just not there. And so when survivors were coming to us, it was more like they were questioning if we were affiliated with the school, but it was also just to vent. And it all started from a meme. And I think Caroline can speak on this a little bit better than I can, but this started because of a meme on social media as like almost a joke.
What is the meme, Caroline?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll describe it the best I can, since I don't have the visual in front of me, but it's Jane Lynch from Glee, and she's I forget her name. I don't know if anyone watched Glee. Basically her coaching role on Glee, and she's got this kind of smug look on her face, and she's the quote is, "I'm going to create an environment so toxic." And so student who was class of 2019 at USF. His name is Will Medense, and he basically became an accidental activist through this. He posted that on his Instagram story and basically, made that parallel to the USF men's soccer team. And by posting that on his story, because to give a little context, I was a freshman in 2010, and I can say from when I first got on campus, one of the things I was told was to avoid the sports teams and their parties, specifically the soccer, because of their predatory behavior. And that was 10 years ago. I was told that. And, that's been a through line in all of the stories, is that whether it's survivors that came forward or it's people who came forward with stories in support of other folks, or people who just heard things on campus, that is absolutely a through line in every single message DM we've gotten is that this was known on campus. These men on this team were this was a culture. This was a toxic culture on campus, right? Starting from the very top. And so, you know, Will had put this out there, and he received all of these messages, you know, mostly women just really sharing their stories and their experiences, these survivors. And some of the women had never even reported this or shared this with anyone, right? Yet we had one survivor, her quote was, you know, who knew that an Instagram story would lead to me telling my story for the first time, right? And so this social media activism almost became a movement. And so, you know, Davey and I came in shortly after to support Will, and he's been phenomenal in supporting survivors and doing this work as well. And we came in and brought our kind of knowledge and understanding and expertise and experiences to this, and directly have been engaging with survivors and hearing their stories. And I think a lot of what has happened at USF, and USF is not the only school. USF is one of many schools in the country that has other schools where it's, you know, it's the floodgates are opening and survivors are telling their stories. And, you know, USF is just kind of where we're personally connected right now, but it's happening as we speak on other campuses. And I think in looking at and hearing from survivors, we've been able to make a lot of connections to the new ruling. So I can go into that as well, and kind of talk about, we wanted to talk about some key issues with the new ruling that we feel are.
Yeah, I wanted to know, like, what if you can, like, bullet point almost, like, what are these, if you can, like, explicitly, like, just lay it out, like, what are these new Title IX changes, and then how is this going to impact reporting and investigating on college campuses moving forward?
Yeah. Do you want to go?
The beginning, and the victim blaming culture is going to be as bad, if not worse, than what it was before the Dear Colleague letter era. And so obviously, like, we are acting as confidential resources to these survivors that have come to us from USF. So I think what we're going to do is, you know, basically give you examples of hypothetical you know, situations, but I can also speak to my own experience and kind of like reverse that and say, okay, if this would be the case, if I was attending school with the new ruling. So I guess the first one that is kind of, you know, nerve-wracking is making sure that the mandated reporting is going to the Title IX coordinator only. So, for example, in high schools, if a student comes to a teacher saying that they're children, they're mandated reporters, right? Where in college, usually students are typically over 18. When someone discloses that they have been assaulted or that they are being harassed, there are still mandated reporters on that campus. Typically, they will be coaches, they will be professors, and anyone that a student would typically interact with. There is not always this need to go like right to a Title IX coordinator, because sometimes students don't even know who that is or what that is, right? So, for example, my experience was as a student athlete, I go to the story will encompass a little bit more of the new ruling, but I go to my coach and I sit down. I'm a distance runner, and I'm like, hey, coach, you know, I need to take 5 days off of practice. I want to switch to an IUD because my birth control is making me gain weight. And him and I had discussed, you know, this could impact my running. Obviously, you know, there's other problems with women's distance running, but at this point of time, this was the issue. And so I'm like, all right, so I need to take 5 days off. Well, in distance running, that's like, you know, I'm losing a month of training if I'm just, you know, sitting on bed rest.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, well, he like politely is like dancing around the question, you know, like, do you need to be on birth control? Like, because obviously I want that to be an option. Like and you know, no, I just need to be on it. I'm getting flustered. And I'm like, I can't feel safe on this campus if I'm not on birth control. And he goes, Davy, why wouldn't you feel safe on this campus? And I burst in tears. I'm like, Coach, I don't want to get pregnant if I'm raped again. And so that's when I get an email about a day or two later from the Title IX office saying, hey, this is what Title IX is. These are the steps you can take to take action against this person, or here are a list of resources to help you get help. Now, luckily enough for me, I had a good friend and roommate that, got me to those mental health services on my campus. I was able to get in right away because the campus advocate, I was considered urgent manner. And they took that seriously and were able to get me into counseling services. Some students don't get that right away. There's a huge wait.
Right.
But along with this new ruling, let's say my coach was very religious and did not believe in contraceptives. And sometimes that is the case, if you're going to people that work at a Jesuit private university. Well, this new ruling allows for a religious exemption. So not only will my coach in this new ruling not be a mandated reporter, so he can choose not to tell Title IX, but he can also say, well, she's on abortion, or did this, did that doesn't align with my religious beliefs. Well, I'm not going to tell. If the school knows that this person is on contraceptives or got an abortion previously, they can decide not to even investigate and take the case. Further, in relation to USF's situation, the admin that did maybe know about this reputation of certain sports teams being perpetrators, they were mandated reporters. That needed to be reported. Even if they were slight rumors, they needed to be reported. And they weren't. And that was against the Title IX ruling before Friday. But now we're still trying to figure out if obviously we're going to hold the school accountable. It's unethical. It's wrong. It's illegal. Rape is a crime. So yes, I think this new ruling is very unsafe on, multiple reasons of what I just said. But yeah, Caroline, do you want to speak to some of the ones that I haven't covered yet?
I just want to make sure I got this clear. So are you saying that, now if someone comes out and says or doesn't say right off the jump that they've been sexually assaulted or anything like that, that if this says, this goes against my own morals and values and beliefs or religious beliefs, that they are not mandated to report this now?
Yes, they're not mandated to report it. Even if they weren't religious and they decided that they didn't, they just thought it would get in the way of, I don't know, team reputation. It's any reason they just, or laziness. I mean, I think
That's crazy.
that we see that that's been a problem on many schools where they've just decided not to write an email.
So Caroline, what were you going to add to that?
Yeah, sure. So, and I would want to just name what Davey is talking about. So, and this is one, I'm going to give some bullet points and on some of the biggest changes and impacts of this new final rule. But what she's really speaking to is the religious exemption. And so schools are able to claim a religious exemption even after they're already under investigation. So that's a huge, huge change. And that piece is also really huge because, it takes away those extra eyes on campus, eyes and ears,
Right.
When students maybe confide in a professor or, an advisor, right, that person isn't mandated to report now. And that is a huge problem, right? So those are two really, really big ones. And I'm just going to kind of go through the other impacts of the new rule. We can dive in deep. Bit of a list, but the rule narrows what constitutes sexual harassment, so defining it, right? It narrows the circumstances where a school is responsible for responding to a report. It lets schools off the hook for most off-campus violence, and we'll get more into that. It allows for lengthy investigations, so no timeline established. Places the burden of proof on survivors. We'll get more into that as well. It allows schools to subject complaints of sexual misconduct to greater scrutiny than any types of other complaints. The rule gives student parties harassing or shaming. The rule requires a live hearing, including cross-examination by a party's advisors. It limits the kinds of supportive measures schools must provide survivors under Title IX. It allows for mediation, even for cases of dating and sexual violence. It stays silent on protections for queer and trans students. And again, as we mentioned, it allows for that religious exemption. So those are 12 of the major impacts and implications of this new final. It's a lot to take in.
I think one of the scariest parts of it is it doesn't protect the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah.
And then also the off-campus and study abroad portion. So obviously, you know, not all students live on campus, in campus housing. A lot of students study abroad. If an incident of assault or harassment is taking place off campus or study abroad, they do not take that case. They are if the student, and this was similar to what Chanel Miller was going through, was she was not a student. So even if the perpetrator, so like in my story, like the perpetrator was not a student, yes, they don't need to investigate the case because that perpetrator is not a student, but do they need to make accommodations for mental health services, assignments, extensions, and the fact that the victim is traumatized and they're going to go through this emotional turmoil? Absolutely. Miller's case, he was a student. Do they need to investigate if he is going to be a threat to other students? Absolutely. And so sometimes you will see Title IX and campus safety, talking with the community police. But like now it's kind of just like universities can just choose if they want to participate. Yeah. And yeah, even study abroad, I think pretty scary is like, what is it? It's like an off campus, it's like 80% of assaults happen off campus. And I think specifically, a lot of the advocacy groups are talking about, well, what about with the pandemic? Well, that Title IX just doesn't stop working because of a pandemic. You're still going to Zoom class with your potential perpetrator. There should be no hold investigations, and there's still the fear of screen or in person and hindering that right to a fair education. That's like that key factor of Title IX. I think the other one that is important to note as far as harassment is the language has been that the schools need to consider it severe and pervasive for them to take on cases of sexual harassment. Now, we see, a lot of harassment, and we specifically see this in intimate partner violence or domestic violence. Harassment leads to assault and rape. And so schools ignoring these red flags and signs. I mean, we even saw this, unfortunately, in the tragic death of Vanessa Gillian in Fort Hood. Fort Hood is a mini city. It's like a mini college campus. And there had to have been, whether it was a cover-up or not, there had to have been signs that may have sexual harassment. I had experienced some harassment during my time in my undergrad, and it involved potential gun violence. And now, if that was the case with this new ruling, I don't know what would have been considered severe, right? Like, so if I go and report that a student has a gun and I feel threatened because of the, sexual harassment that I was experiencing, the temper that I was seeing,
Right.
not talked about, any stigmas, it's usually someone Um,
Yeah.
and so I think it's really important to note, why are the schools that don't even know these individuals most of the time, sometimes are not even fully trained or educated in these gender-based violence topics, why are they deciding what severe and pervasive means? Does someone need to be killed
Hmm.
before it's
Hmm.
considered serious? But also, we're seeing some of these schools not take rape seriously. Like,
Hmm.
rape, a violent, invasive crime. It's terrible. And that's what I think is so disheartening about the Department of Education not taking survivor stories into consideration with this ruling,
Right.
trying to protect perpetrators that, I mean, they're just going and doing the same thing to other students.
I mean, we see that a lot with many policies, right? Where you have people at the tables making these rules and regulations and judgments on things that they've never even experienced, right? Or have not even been directly impacted or know someone who's been experienced. And that's the issue here, right? Like that is the one of the biggest issues is you have people so far from the actual problem. Like, how dare we have conversations around what survivors need without survivors at the table, right? And specifically women survivors, right?
Mhm.
At these tables and in these conversations. And I think, it's one of those situations where you make room for yourself at the table, because no one's gonna give you that space, unfortunately. So it's, you literally have to aggressively force your way, to have these kinds of conversations where we raise awareness and talk about it, where there's other nonprofit organizations and advocates and activists who are amplifying these stories and providing these platforms to share these stories, and the importance of it. And I really want to also talk about is just, how can, because we're talking a lot about like just San Francisco, and which is important. And I also think in generally speaking, how can other people who are interested in this topic and want to take action, right? Like, how can others learn more about this, advocate, and take action?
First thing is vote, but Caroline, you can go into that.
Nah.
Yes. Yeah. Obviously, policy is so incredibly important, and voting is obviously a way that we can all do that work. But there's other steps that we can take in our daily lives to do that. I think um, it's important to kind of start by listening to survivors and uplifting their stories, right? And really educating ourselves, and having folks educate themselves first, right? And then if that passion comes about and they want to take action, there's incredible organizations that are doing organizing around this work, like Know Your Nine. And so that's a great organization that has toolkits for students who want to petition their school. They want to write an open letter to their school. They want to have students take tangible actions, and these are things we've already done in our experience on campus. And I think just connecting with other schools work as well, right? And really creating a network where we can all come together and say, this is happening at my school. Okay, this is happening at my school, or this happened at my alma mater. All right, how can we all come together to show the Department of Education that this final rule is unjust, right? And one of the ways that we've been effective in mobilizing students is through a petition. And I think I can say this for probably any institution, particularly private institutions. They're very image based, right? And they're very focused on having a good image and bringing in money, bringing in, donors, and bringing in that money so they can do their marketing. And it's not a good look if you say, hey, one in five women experience sexual violence, right, in their lifetime, and it might happen to your daughter or your son or whoever at our school. Would you like to come? Would you like to send your child here? right? That's not the best marketing.
Right.
So, so schools really have an incentive to not share this information and to sweep it under the rug. And so I think starting the conversation is so important. So first of all, just other people sharing on social media what Title IX is, what these changes are, tweeting, posting on Instagram, and I think we're seeing a lot of online activism right now, especially during the pandemic, and we're in the middle of like a civil rights movement, with Black Lives Matter. And we've seen a lot of powerful changes being made, with police budgets being cut. And there's a lot of activism on the ground right now, but there's also a lot of activism that's taking place online too. And so there's power with both. And when they go back to campus, there are ways that they can mobilize each other through online protesting or through, a visual campaign or, petition like we did. Our petition that Will started has over 5,300 signatures.
Wow.
And once that petition which is huge, right? Because our school is a small school. So that's about almost half of the school population.
And so those are some of the things that you guys have been like recently working on in relation to this. And
Yeah.
I want to point that out because those are simple but very effective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you are able to collect more people to support this, then that's awareness, and awareness is power, right? And so those are simple things that all college students all around the world can take on. And if they were to do a petition at their college, like what do they have to do? Like what is the process of forming this petition around this issue?
Sure. So, sorry, Davey, you go ahead.
Go ahead, Caroline.
Okay, sorry. I think for us, specifically our group, it was created through change.org. So very simple, super accessible platform. And I think that's the easiest way. I think most petitions we're seeing right now are done through change.org, right? But something else I think that is very important too, we wrote an open letter to the school on Friday. We published it in light of the new rules being put into effect. And we wanted to basically tell the school, even though the final rule is in place, we want you to commit to survivors. And we outlined it. And a number of other schools are doing that as well too. So they can do that petition through change.org or whatever platform they want to host it on. But they can also come together and create a group of students and survivors to write their own letter to the school and explain why it's important to their school and to their survivors and how it's impacting their campus specifically.
Davey, could you speak about, why is it important to have a petition? And what are the possible outcomes that can result from it?
So I think it's important to start with a petition because you're putting what you want out there. Now, also with the petition, you want to have the list of demands, which is why that we did that, saying, support survivors or support Black Lives Matter movement. The school doesn't even know what these people want, what they want to change. And I think what's great about these letters, these petitions, is the internet has given us so much. Rachel Cargill has the Great Unlearn. That's a great template that she provides for Black Lives Matter and holding academic institutions accountable. Know Your Nine has these templates. And what happens is you get people that maybe align with the injustices and the oppression talking about it, and then their peers see it. And I think why Caroline has been so refreshing in working with me, because originally, like, Caroline and I didn't know each other. We still have never met in person. But what happened was, I was like, I come, Will's getting all these messages, these stories are coming forth, and they're just going to a personal Instagram account. And I was like, all right, let's make an email account that, it's a confidential space. Let's make an Instagram account that people know we're not tied to the party audit right now, along with multiple universities right now that are getting an outpour of survivors stories. University of Michigan, Dartmouth, UNC is back on the radar, which was a huge one back in the Dear Colleague letter. But the point is, why Caroline's been so refreshing, and why people like Will and other people that, you know, have come into this movement, is because they've been great allies. And I think that's what the petition does. It starts this conversation for someone that might not think about this every day. I think about what happened to me every single day. It doesn't go away. It will never will. And that I've accepted that, but that they don't have to get it. Like, they just have to see that it's affecting the entire campus culture. It's affecting an entire educational system, and it's affecting everyone's right at a fair education. It's also just a crime. Like, and so I think what is so important with social media activism, petitions, letters to the schools, is you are getting a flood of people to hold this institution accountable. There's power in numbers. And then these, like, I think what's so important for students to understand and realize is they have the power. They are the ones writing the check to these schools, giving them the money. These schools need to listen. This is a business transaction. If you are not getting what you want out of the service that they're providing you, I'm not saying leave, and that's students shouldn't be forced out, which we have seen in every university across the nation. But it is a call to action that every university can't do this to students. Like, it's wrong. And that's why, like, going on the federal level, asking schools to hold the Obama administration policies intact and even go better and beyond from that administration. And again, this November, like, we have to hold that ticket if they're in the White House accountable. Like, this doesn't stop. It never will. It's never going to stop for survivors. So it's education, and people that, you know, maybe don't completely align with the injustice, but support the people that have been victimized and traumatized, and pushing for that change, just so everyone's safe.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. And I really just appreciate both of you guys just speaking so passionately, and Davey sharing a little bit about your own, you know, lived experiences. I really think it sheds a light on something that is often overlooked and not talked about as much, right? And needs to be. And I'm glad that it is now, more so than ever. And I think just the timing of how everything is happening, you know, there's going to be change. And you know, like mentioned what Davey was saying before, is like there's power in numbers, right? And so if we continue to fight and continue to raise our voices and continue to, you know, say that this isn't right when it's not right, then change will happen, right? And we can't stop fighting. And I really want our listeners to know, like, how they can stay in contact with you. You know, how can they learn more about you?
Instagram.
What's your handles?
It's at Davy Jags, so DEVI. That's also my website, davyjags.com. Email davyjags@gmail. Like, it. I'm always. I mean, I think Caroline and I are both always open to talking to people, and help, at least, like, you know, forming that network. Just network. Right. Like, at least if we can't answer your questions, we can point you to someone who can.
Exactly. And how about you, Caroline?
Sure. Yeah. So my Instagram handle is at Caroline PENNYC. So Caroline Penny C. I am private, so you will have to request me, but I will accept you. And same thing on Twitter. My Twitter's public, so feel free to drop in my messages. But yeah, always open. My email is also carolinechris27@gmail.com, and we're definitely always open to talking to students and survivors, whoever has any sort of question. And I also just want to amplify the account that we've been working with and helps, you know, Davey helped create with Will, with these specific cases we're working on. It's at And so that's a great place for folks to reach out as well. We monitor it, and it's also a great place for students to go and look and get ideas of maybe ways that they want to do their activism. And there's a lot of other student groups and campuses that have these accounts as well. So I encourage folks to also follow other schools and amplify those accounts as well, and survivor stories.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to make sure that, you know, I list that information in our description so people can just like copy and paste it. And, you know, in addition to that, if anyone is looking for other third-party organizations or other means of support, also make sure you look into the National Sexual Assault Hotline, which is through rain.org. And you could reach their number at 800-656-4673. And then in addition to rain.org, I can also be a resource for individuals who may have been victims of domestic violence. And you can visit my website, lighttolife.org, or email at onemission.onevoice@gmail.com. So thank you guys, and stay tuned for the next episode.
Much.